G'day guys and gal. GW doesn't really like implementing a hard power scaling system into their setting. They don't want to say a Dark Angel is a better Space Marine than a Word Bearer, or that the Ultramarines are just straight up a better and more powerful Legion than the Night Lords. However, time and time again, the lore has shown that not every Space Marine, Primarch, or even Legion is equal. Some are just straight up better than others. So it's also not too much of a surprise when I boldly state that the Thousand Sons Legion were by far the most powerful. But if they were so powerful, how did they get clapped so hard? With only a handful of still living Thousand Sons around in the setting. It also begs another question: why were the Thousand Sons allowed to be so much more powerful than the other legions? Why would the Emperor create such a clear and distinct front runner? Before we get started, after a shitload of hours, problem solving and creativity, I'm so happy to present the next diorama we've made, Magnus vs Leman Russ. Their fateful duel captured during the peak of the fall of Prospero. The best part is that we're giving this diorama away to one of you guys or gal, but let's actually check out this bad boy before I tell you how to win it. We wanted to capture every detail from the lore, so we have Ferric and Gary featured, and we even custom modeled and printed a bunch of warp fires surrounding the Primarchs that can be lit up with a UV light underneath the diorama. This represents the warp fire that stopped anyone from interfering in the duel that was present in the lore. As a bit of a cool feature, we wanted to represent how the fall of Prospero was twisting time and fate due to all the powers at play. So upon the dais that the brothers are dueling on, the marble was carved into prophecy as the duel takes place, showing a stylized rendition of Leman and Magnus, even as the two brothers fulfilled the prophecy while battling on top of it. Finally, both Primarchs are magnetized to the diorama so it can be taken off, played in a Horus Heresy tabletop game, and then put back on to store it. So how do you actually get this? Well, this was made via Dice Dioramas, a company I own with Chris where we give away a diorama and Warhammer every month. We have made Angron vs the Lion from the Arcs of Omen, Rylanor's Last Stand, and Horus vs Sanguinius, as well as giving away thousands of dollars of Warhammer and other sick prizes. All these dioramas have now been shipped off to their respective winners, and we're really keen to pick a new winner for this one. All you have to do is sign up to one of 6 membership tiers or buy a membership boost, which is a one-time purchase to enter into the current giveaway. You can stack membership boosts on top of each other or even an existing membership. Giveaway is in less than 2 weeks. You don't want to miss the chance to take this bad boy home. Link to learn more or sign up is below. Today we'll go over why the Thousand Sons were the most powerful legion, how they got so powerful, and how they ate so much shit despite their power. Let's get into it. When the Emperor was creating each Primarch and Space Marine Legion, he didn't deliberately jizz extra hard into one test tube over another. Each Legion was to have a specific strength, something they would excel in over the other Legions. Some of these strengths were not necessarily military based. The Word Bearers were supposed to be the champions of the Imperial truth. The people they conquered would become the best and brightest of the Imperium. At least that was the plan. Likewise, the Space Wolves were warriors through and through. They were built for war and destruction, thus in most cases, a Space Wolf warrior would beat another Legionnaire from a different Legion in combat. However, some legions were a lot more experimental than others. The Emperor fucked around a bit to see what would happen, giving some legions a huge strength boost at the cost of also giving them a distinctive weakness. The Blood Angels are a good example. They live longer and stay more youthful than other Space Marines, they are more psychically connected to their Primarch, and they almost seem to have more finesse and speed than a regular Space Marine. However, they also suffered from the Red Thirst and upon Sanguinius' death, the Black Rage, 2 very debilitating conditions. Likewise, the Space Wolves had the Calyx Helix, giving them sharper instincts, better hearing, better smell, and their Rune Priest could access a special type of warp power, connected to Fenris, that was very powerful whilst not risking Chaos Corruption. However, some Space Wolves would mutate into Berserker Wolfen, whilst others would occasionally become feral and attack their own allies. The Emperor obviously did not want 20 legions full of experimental fucked up Space Marines, so only really experimented with 3 legions, focusing on ensuring the other 17 had pure, reliable gene seed. I say 3 legions were experiments, since the Thousand Sons were by far the most experimental, an experiment that went poorly. The Emperor hypercharged this legion's sensitivity to the warp and actively sought out Psychos on Terra to join its ranks and become the first of the Thousand Sons. It was to be a legion of wizards. Now the tabletop might not represent it super well, but in lore, Space Marine Psychers are so fucking overpowered. There is obviously a scale to things, but they can literally solo enemy squads of Astartes, turning them inside out, frying them within their own armor, freezing them. They are like a one-man army to a point where the only way to counter an enemy Space Marine wizard is to have your own Space Marine wizard, or a blank, or a custodian, as they don't seem to be too bothered by psychers. Now imagine a legion of these wizards. Sure, not every Thousand Son was a psyker, but a shitload of them were, and even the ones that weren't still had a level of latent psychic ability that helped with stuff like reflexes and instincts. With these powers, the Thousand Sons were unstoppable during the Great Crusade. Sure, their gene seed wasn't super stable, thus their recruitment wasn't super fast, but it doesn't matter when you have scores of warriors lobbing fireballs and shooting lightning out of their dickholes. They could challenge and defeat enemies that other legions straight up could not. See, Space Marines and even Primarchs already struggled against warp-based enemies. The warp wasn't very well understood during the Great Crusade, so many of the great threats encountered were based on the warp. Other legions had to bust their balls and clutch wins against these types of foes. The Thousand Sons just obliterated them like it was a Tuesday. However, here is the catch, and where an interesting issue materializes. The Thousand Sons had an extremely deep, incurable weakness that even the Emperor did not know how to fix, that being the flesh change. The Emperor had pushed the Thousand Sons' psychic sensitivity too hard, to a point where now Tzeentch had access to the mind, bodies, and spirits of that legion. It's unclear if Tzeentch introduced the flesh change to the legion or merely accelerated it. However, all Thousand Son psychers were prone to turning into Chaos Spawn, either very slowly, molecule by molecule, as they used their psychic powers, or they would be all good, but then due to an excessive use of their power in a short period or just bad luck, their body would erupt with mutation and they would very quickly transform. Sometimes they lost their minds during the transformation, other times they didn't, but probably wish they did. Either way, this was a huge problem for the Legion, with afflicted legionnaires being put into stasis or culled. Magnus even travelled to the warp and sacrificed his eye in an attempt to stop the change, which worked, at least temporarily, but only because Tzeentch let it work in order to stoke Magnus's arrogance and make him think he could achieve whatever he wanted to, something that would result in the breaking of the webway and the dooming of mankind. Now I get why Tzeentch was stoking the flesh change. It made Magnus and the Thousand Sons desperate, and Chaos gets horny as fuck for desperation. But even when they aligned with Tzeentch and the traitors, the flesh change didn't stop. If anything, it accelerated, which shows that either Tzeentch is the biggest asshole ever, or that the flesh change was always a gene flaw, accidentally introduced by the Emperor, that Tzeentch had influence on but didn't create. So basically, by cranking up the Thousand Sons' power to 11, they were also completely and utterly doomed. Like their fate was sealed, all would fall to the flesh change. The Emperor knew this, which is why when he offered Magnus a chance to rejoin the Loyalists, the condition was that the Thousand Sons would be left to die and go extinct, and a new legion would be created for Magnus. This legion was heavily implied to be the Grey Knights. See, the gene flaws of the Blood Angels and the Space Wolves could be managed. It wasn't a death sentence for those legions, but for the Thousand Sons it was. The flesh change was only stopped due to Ahriman turning most of his legion into undead automata, which wasn't exactly a great solution. This is all well and good, but the Thousand Sons did lose the battle for Prospero and they ended up shattered, with only about 1,000 of them surviving. If they were the most powerful, then how did this happen? Well, basically everything that could go wrong for the Thousand Sons did. Firstly, Magnus refused to help his legion, even hindering it, believing they needed to die and be sacrificed in the name of the Imperium for his sins. Hence he even blocked their psychic senses so that they didn't know the Space Wolves were coming. Instead of meeting the Space Wolf fleet in the void, having an epic space battle, and then using their orbitable guns to harry the Space Wolves and make their invasion a nightmare, the Space Wolves were free to bring their ships into orbit and blow up most of the Thousand Sons' defense grid and land their legion without issue. The guardsmen of Prospero then had to rush out and sacrifice themselves in order to give the Thousand Sons time to form up, so the 15th Legion lost their auxiliary troops, orbitable defenses, and had no fleet, plus were taken by surprise, and their Primarch also abandoned them. However, when the Space Wolves launched their assault, the tide turned in the favour of the Thousand Sons. The Sons of Rust were getting fucked on. Many of them went without helmets and got shot in the head for their foolishness. However, the real damage began happening when the Thousand Sons unleashed their sorcery. Space Wolves were melted, fried, atomized, exploded, and killed in countless creative, horrifying ways. The only thing that kept them somewhat going was Leman, the Rune Priests, and their raw stubbornness, but it quickly became apparent that they were losing. However, the Thousand Sons' overuse of their psychic power also turned out to be a bit of an L. See, Constantine Valdor, his Custodes and Sisters of Silence refused to join the assault because they thought it was retarded. However, when he saw the sorcery of the Thousand Sons and their refusal to fight as normal Astartes, he also saw that they were breaking the Edict of Nicaea, and by order of the Emperor, were now traitors. Hence he joined the battle. This is where the Thousand Sons got fucked on. The Sisters of Silence were now blanking out most of the battlefield, removing the Thousand Sons' ability to use their powers. This also gave the Thousand Sons massive headaches and lethargy, as blankness fucks psychers up. Hence they were sitting ducks to be torn to shreds by the Custodes and Space Wolves. Valdor personally slew some of the finest warriors in the Thousand Sons legions, warriors who could have turned the tide, and even killed their 100-strong mega elite blade masters. Without their psychic powers, the Thousand Sons were being slaughtered. By the time Magnus came to the battlefield, it was too late to win, and he was nearly immediately engaged by Leman, who had anti-psycho abilities himself as well as his two wolves. So it took the Thousand Sons getting ambushed, not having their Primarch, not having their fleet, losing their auxiliary and orbital defenses, and they were still going to beat the Space Wolves. It was only the Sisters of Silence and Custodian Guard led by Valdor that allowed them to be defeated, with the Space Wolves still paying a heavy price. Not to mention, Tzeentch decided it would be funny if the Thousand Sons tutelaries, which were like these little spirits that acted as pets to the Thousand Sons, suddenly went rogue and attacked their masters, causing many many Thousand Suns to overload and explode or fall to the flesh change. Every way they could get fucked, they got fucked. These days, the Thousand Suns aren't much of a major threat due to their incredibly low numbers and their selfish pursuits. They very rarely team up with the other traitor legions and focus mostly on gaining knowledge or fucking over the Space Wolves. They lose pretty much every battle they are involved in, getting beaten by Leman, the Eldar, Titus, and the Space Wolves in recent lore. Magnus recently retook Prospero and is rebuilding it into a safe haven for psychers. The Big E just put one too many drops of cum in their test tubes, I guess. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then join Dice Dioramas for your chance to take home this incredible Magnus vs Leman diorama. Hit the subscribe button and hit the real subscribe button for more powerful content. Join the Discord for more memes that I'll see you in the next one. Peace.